Welcome to the Boat Buyer's Secret Weapon Series. I am your host, Captain Matt, and today we're talking about how to buy an older boat. So maybe something that's 10, 15, 20, even 30 years old or older. What are the extra special things that you need to think about? So number one, I'm going to recommend you have a couple of things with you when you go to look at an older boat. The first one is a long flathead screwdriver. So a nice big flathead screwdriver. We'll get to that, why that's important. The second is bring a flashlight so you can get down and see in some of the cracks and crevices. And then also bring some kind of a rag so that as we get into the engine and looking at some different things, you're going to use all of these and we're going to talk about in detail. And the first thing that we're going to look for on an older boat is we're going to look for rot and delamination. So you can see where we're putting the screwdriver in here in the transom, that clearly tells you that there's some rot there. Now, the flooring and the transom, you may not have access to the actual wood, so you're going to use that screwdriver, and what you're going to do is you're going to tap on that gel coat. You're going to tap on all of the areas on the boat. Everywhere there's a through-hull fitting, everywhere there's a screw that goes into the gel coat, and you're going to tap, listen for a nice solid ting, ting, ting sound, and not a thud, 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 okay? That thud is indication that there's water has gotten in, and where there's water, the rot's not going to be too far behind. The delamination, you can use the similar test, but the delamination is when the gel coat and the fiberglass layers, the lamination schedule, how they build the boat initially. Watch some of my other videos on how a boat's built, has started to come apart. So when they are laid, they're all bonded together. They become a single surface. When they delaminate, water's gotten in, maybe there was some damage, maybe it was a manufacturing process, wasn't as rigid as it could have been, and that fiberglass starts coming away from the gel coat, or the fiberglass comes away from the fiberglass, and you get that separation. Once that happens, there's no putting it back in unless you dive in and you sand it all down and you re-fiberglass and you re-gel coat, which can be a very expensive thing. The other reason, the other thing you can do with the screwdriver is as you get down into compartments, you can use that poking end and kind of poke in any exposed wood that you see and see if you can push in if it's soft. The other thing that you want to do on the flooring is kind of lightly bounce up and down a little bit. See how solid that is. Everywhere on the deck of that boat, especially somewhere where a screw goes in, like the seat pedestals, where water could have seeped in. Now, this is a biggest issue in boats that are around early 2000s and later. So, 80s, 90s boats are more likely to have this damage because they didn't protect the plywood and they didn't use as high of a grade of plywood either. So that's the first thing that you want to check out. The next is, especially if it's a center console, is waterlogged foam. So the foam is there to give you float level in the water if you were to hit an obstruction, to get a hole in your boat, to float level. What can happen, unfortunately, is that foam, it can get water in it. So if somebody screws in and that water where it should be a closed cell foam, which is going to repel water, well, if somebody puts a screw in or there's somehow it gets a crack in it and that water kind of seeps in, now, once it's inside, it can just suck up that moisture like a sponge, making the boat extra heavy. It's really hard to find. Again, you can use your screwdriver to tap, but it's more difficult. This one, you might have to wait until the boat's in the water and see, man, it seems like it's sitting really low in the water, even without all of the gear. One way it can happen as well is the rub rail. If the rub rail is separating, so when they build a boat, they put the top and the bottom layer overlap a little bit, and then they'll put the screws in there to attach the hull and the deck. It sort of fits on like a shoebox. Then they'll put the screws on, and then they'll put some sealant around it, and then they'll put the rub rail on to finish it off and to protect the boat from pilings and things like that. Well, what can happen on some older boats is those seams can fail, and you can get water that shoots up in there, and it can be a major problem because structurally, that's the only spot where that hole in the deck is fused together, is on that rub rail in most situations. So if you have some issues in that rub rail, again, it can be a very expensive repair, and it can be one that sometimes is not worth repairing. If you're looking at a cruiser, you've got to be concerned, or a cuddy cabin, anything with the cabin, is water intrusion into the cabin. You can see all the mold and mildew in the ceiling. That's a good telltale sign that there's moisture somewhere. Now, you've got to figure out, is that moisture coming from a wet towel that was left in there and just the humidity, or is that moisture coming from maybe a leaky hatch, or maybe there's a fitting that is leaking, it's not sealed up, a screw that didn't get sealed up, where a rub rail or something is mounted, or maybe they mounted something in a place that shouldn't have been, and that's where the water's getting in, and now it's, again, in between the fiberglass and gel coat and the liner. Now that's a major problem. A great way to test for that is to actually spray some water on it all around on that bow, so that you can see if there's water getting in. If you see a little spot that starts to get wet or even dripping, and now you know, okay, we've got an issue there. And again, depending on the boat, maybe a situation where you say, all right, this is an area that I walk away, but at least know about it. So you may find a boat, it passes all of these areas with flying colors. It was tucked away in some old lady's garage, and finally it's time to sell it, and it looks pristine. It's perfect. Well, a question that you need to ask is, when was the last time this boat was run out on the water? So not just run on a hose, but when's the last time this thing has been out on the water and everything has been exercised on it? The motor's been on, it's been put under load, the bilge pumps have been on, whatever it is, the live wells have been run. And that's a key point, because if it's an older boat that hasn't been run, we're going to talk in just a little bit about some things that can come up there, but that's a key question to ask, even if the boat looks perfectly. And that's why you need to continue digging before you write the check for this boat. And a great place to start is the wiring. If you have a wiring issue on some of these older boats, one, it's very difficult to get to the actual wires. It can be very difficult to run new wires. So if you have an electrical problem and it looks something like this, guess what? You're going to be very hard pressed to fix that in an easy way, in an inexpensive way. And there could be some potential fire danger as well. As we talk about fire danger, especially on stern drives, is, hey, these are GM blocks in most situations. If it's old enough, it could be a Ford block. Sometimes people will say, hey, I can get an alternator for $100. The marine alternator is $500 or $300 or whatever. I'm just going to put the automotive part in. Well, you may think that's fine, but when it comes to stern drives and it comes to electrical parts specifically, because you have that engine in an enclosed environment and the potential for fumes to get in there, you don't want any electronic components or electrical components that could have an external spark. So the alternator, the starters, the fuel pumps, all of those in the marine world are enclosed so that there's no potential for open spark. You want to look and make sure that it doesn't say Napa on the starter, and you want to make sure it's rated for marine grade. If you start seeing automotive fuel filters or oil filters and some other automotive parts, you may want to just slow down a little bit and do a double check on the starter, the alternator, and those fuel pumps, just to make sure that you're not buying something where you're putting you and your family in danger, or that you're going to have to swap out, adding extra expense to the boat. On an older boat, even on any boat really, the compression check is something that I say just go ahead and get it done. That's going to tell you how strong that engine is firing based on the compression of each cylinder. Now, every engine's going to have its own acceptable band. You want it to be within 10% plus or minus so all cylinders, you want them to be in about 10% range. So, 170, 180, 175, 185, and you want them to kind of be in that tight band. And then there should be what was the factory spec when this engine was new? So you can see, all right, have we dropped down? Maybe the compression is 120, 115, 120, 120, 115. If that 120 is what it came out of the factory as, great. If it came out at 180, well, now we know we've lost some compression in the cylinders, and so it's something that you can look up online. You can look up in the owner's manual if they have that. But on outboard, on a stern drive, on an inboard, definitely check that compression. Now, again, with older boats, one of the things you have to be worried about are the seals. Hey, this thing has had a lot of use. Maybe it hasn't been used as much lately, which is the case with a lot of older boats. That's why we asked the question, when's the last time it was run? Because if you have a prop shaft seal that is going bad, maybe some water intrusion got in to that lower unit, which we'll talk about in just a second, your seals and your gaskets and your bellows, all of those things can be problematic where water can get in. You can have oil and water mixing. And if your bellows are cracked like this and you leave that boat in the water overnight, your boat could easily sink from a $100 part that has a little bit of dry rot or a small crack in it, and it can happen pretty quickly. So all of those things you want to check into, and those seals are something that, man, it's really easy for somebody that's kind of pinching some pennies on the maintenance, and they say, hey, it's smoking a little bit. We're just going to keep adding oil in and not check to see if there's a seal issue. The gear lube is going low. Hey, we'll just top it off every couple outings. Meanwhile, you're leaking out gear lube, and you may have water intrusion getting in there. Hey, there's a little bit of water that's getting in the bilge compartment. I don't know where it's coming from, but we trailer it, so I'm not really concerned. If you buy that boat and you continue that path, you could be in for a very expensive or catastrophic failure. That's why you also want to look at the actual lower unit itself. So there's a couple things. This is what it looks like in that lower unit. There's all these gears. That's what the gear lube is lubricating, is all those moving internal parts. A OMC, a Volvo, a Mercruiser, a Yamaha, Mercury, all of those have similar but different components in them depending on the type of clutch that they're using and the type of system, but they're all being lubricated. So anything like this where you see a crack, you see something that is got a lot of corrosion on it, and it's eating into that metal, that's a problematic thing that you need to figure out. Why is it happening? And two, is there water getting in? That's where the large screwdriver comes in, because you can go to, on the back end of this bullet where the prop shaft is, there's usually going to be a big screw that you can crack, and you can test that gear lube. Just give it a little turn, let a little bit leak out on your rag, kind of rub it through your fingers. Are there metal shavings in there? Is it a consistency? Is it clean? Or is it a milky brown color like chocolate milk, or maybe a little frothy? That means, hey, there's likely some water in here. And then you also want to test to make sure that prop spin's true and that you don't have a bent prop shaft because you hit an underwater obstruction. There's a lot of things in that foot that you want to check out, because that can be problematic. We'll talk about getting parts in just a little bit. So in addition to the lower unit, obviously you want to check the power head. We talked about checking compression, but pull the cowling off, open up the engine compartment, pull the flame arrestor off if it's a stern drive, and poke around in there. Pull the spark plugs if you have that capability. If you're doing compression check, you're going to pull them anyway, and check to look, are they fouled up? They look nice and clean. How does the engine look overall? And then who's going to do the work on that engine? So are you going to do it yourself? Do you have the knowledge? Do you have the owner's manual? Do you have a place to get the parts? There's some of these engines have not been made for a period of time. The OMC, if you watch my 8 boats not to buy, we talk about not buying the OMC stringer drive because it can be problematic and it's full of headaches. Force engines are another one I would stay away from. The Evinrude. Now Evinrude's been out of business for a couple of years, a little over a year. Are you going to be able to get the parts for the type of engine and the drive that you have? And then are you going to be able to find somebody to work on that if you're not able to do the work yourself, or there's a major issue that needs to be diagnosed? Do you have access to somebody that's willing, able, and has the capacity to work on your boat when you need it? Because if you don't, you could be buying a boat that, hey, it's going to get very expensive to have that just sitting in the yard, sitting in the driveway, and you're not able to use it. And all too often it happens when people buy some older boats. Now, it's not just the boat. If you're buying an older boat, hey, it's likely on a trailer. Don't forget that trailer. You've got to go through, you've got to inspect the trailer, the winch stand, check the axle, especially if you're in saltwater, check for that rust and corrosion, check the lights and the wiring, the coupler. And don't forget those tires. Those tires are $100, $150 each. So you're talking $300 on a single axle. You're talking $600 or more on a double axle trailer. And you want to make sure that you don't get caught off guard. You find a boat for $3,000, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, and you pull it home. You have a blowout, and you're stuck on the side of the road with your brand new to you boat. If you've had an issue in buying an older boat, leave your comments of your experience, good, bad, the ugly, and please give this video a thumbs up if you're getting value from it. Now, we're not done, because we still have to decide, are we going to buy this boat? Everything checks out. Mechanically, it's sound. Structurally, it's sound. We've checked through everything, and they say, hey, Captain Matt, we're looking awesome. Now, the next thing you need to do, if they haven't run this boat for a while, is that registration up to date? Because it can be very problematic getting a boat registered and titled if the registration isn't up to date. If the registration isn't up to date, are there any back taxes, back registration fees, any penalty fees that are outstanding? Some states, and you have to check in your state, will require that any of that back stuff be paid before they'll issue the new registration to the new owner. It's happened over and over and over. People just don't consider it. And then guess what? If I've sold you the boat and now it's out of my hair, I'm not going to come and pay $200 or $500 or $1,000 for back fees when I don't own that boat anymore. You're going to be hard pressed to get it. So I encourage you, one, call the DNR, the wildlife, wherever that boat's going to be registered, and just do a double check. Give them the registration numbers or the hull identification number, which is on the back right-hand corner, the starboard side on the transom. It's usually stamped in there, a little plate that will have the HIN number, the hull identification number. And between those two, they should be able to check to see if everything is paid up and that you're clear there. You can also check the boat history report to make sure that the person selling it to you is the last owner of record based on the databases that Boat History Report has to offer. And there's a link down below in the description. So here's the bottom line that I look at is, what will it cost to repair the boat? So you're going to find some things that are off. It's an older boat. It's not going to be perfect. What's it going to cost to get this boat running? To get this boat in a condition where I'm going to be happy. So if that means replacing the upholstery, if that means doing some mechanical work, if that's just, hey, I just got to clean it up. And then what will it be worth after the repairs? I see a lot of people that are looking at some more inexpensive boats under $10, $15, $20,000. And they say, oh, it's just, it just needs to be cleaned up. But did you really go through and make sure that it's more than just a bath that it needs? And if so, what's that going to cost? Who's going to do it? Can you get the parts? And what will it be worth when it's all said and done? Because if you spend $5,000 on it and it's going to cost you $2,500 to get it where you're going to be happy, and assume it's going to cost more than you think, and the boat's only going to be worth $6,000 total, then you have to make the decision, am I better off passing on this boat and waiting for the next one? There is one out there that will fit your budget, but you may have to go through some turds to find that diamond. So if you like the video, here's a couple more that I recommend to you. You can also grab the Boat Buyers Toolkit. It's a free toolkit that you can download, boatbuyerssecretweapon.com/toolkit. It'll help you go through all of these inspections and more so that you make sure that you buy the right boat for you and you don't buy somebody else's headache. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And remember, life truly is better on a boat.